Umpire Wolfton, welcome to the Kriegsspiel Umpiring Chat Show.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here.
Well, I'm delighted to have you here. You're a well-known character in the International Kriegsspiel Society, so I'm sure everyone's going to be fascinated with what we talk about today, and a little bit more about you. But what part of the world are you hailing us from?
I'm from the eastern United States, kind of the Virginia area,
Virginia
or the
area. Okay,
DMV,
great.
as they say.
There you go. Okay, cool. And just start us from the beginning. How did you find the Kriegsspiel Society?
It's kind of a funny story. I was trying to get into wargaming. Well, I think when I was in high school still,
Uh huh.
and I came across this live stream of a Gettysburg live game, like years ago,
Right.
and I had no idea that it was something you could actually join, and so I contrived to create my own Kriegsspiel system
You did.
without any knowledge at all of what I was doing.
That's great.
And so I did that for like a year and came up with the most horrible system that you've ever seen in your life and will never see the light of day again.
Well, who did you
And
play with during that year?
just my family. So I think
Okay.
I tried one or two games and they were bored to tears.
Right, right.
And I think a year or two later, I figured out that you could actually join the server.
Yeah,
And by then, it rebranded to the IKS.
amazing. I did my first game on PowerPoint after seeing a a video like that. So I know of terrible systems. I certainly created one on PowerPoint, moving little boxes around on PowerPoint.
Yeah.
This is before my TTS days. Terrific. And so you talk us through your history of wargaming, your interest. I mean, is this something are you more of a historian? Or are you more of a gamer? What brings you to the hobby?
Um, I'm more of an amateur historian. I actually
Okay.
minored in European topics in college,
All right.
but it's I think the concept really is what appealed to me. It was kind of you could actually do a grand scale game if you wanted to. You could simulate every single part of an engagement, and I haven't seen any system that's done that and actually had a proper fog of war element in it.
Right.
And whenever I looked at kind of minis games, I was always very frustrated by, well, they can always tell when you're trying to do a flank attack. Or you can never try and, I guess, kind of do a grand maneuver and just have it not be known the entire time.
Right. Right.
So,
And what period of history have you studied, or what's your period of interest?
sure. Um, I used to really like the American Civil War. I would visit Battlefield all the time. In fact, they used to pass out little Battlefield cards or whatever, and I would collect those if I could. It was like a Junior Rangers program or whatever.
Right.
And I think as time was on, I kind of got more and more into Napoleonics. It's definitely with all the Little War TV series, and I guess all the started to get into more Napoleonic games on the server. Really got me into Napoleonic history, and now I've read like 4 books, which is not a lot compared to most people, but I've done a lot of
Yeah.
reading on the
That's
subject.
sufficient.
And finally, after that, I went to ancient Greek history for no reason at all. I don't know why I did that.
You have actually created several ancients games on the server. And now when you first saw the original Gettysburg um, video, your impulse was to create a game. So did you lead with umpiring from day one?
When I was by myself, I did because I knew no one else would do it. I think when I was on the server, it took me a bit, and I didn't actually start umpiring. I think for a few months.
Okay.
I can't really remember. And my first game was like a Lord of the Rings James game
Right.
where I did a very bad job with some trebuchets that people still remember.
There you go. My first game was a BattleTech James game. So I think what happens is we all are indoctrinated by a James science fiction game, and we immediately run to Napoleonics.
It's basic. That should be studied actually. But
it's a it is a thing. So, kids, if you like Napoleonics, don't start with the James Napoleonic games, or you'll be out in space for the remainder of your career. What
exactly.
Now you're very well known for maps. You create maps. You kind of set yourself up as a person who's wants to create for others. How did that get started?
Um, I think I started map making around 11 years ago,
Okay,
and it started with fantasy maps and kind of the standard Lord of the Rings. You got this idea in your head for a world, and you want to world build it, and so you got to make a map for it. And I would always get
right.
stuck on the map making portion.
Okay,
So, and over time, as my interest in something like Kriegsspiel grew, I started making my own paper battle maps.
paper battle
And
maps. Okay,
yep. And so my entire process was kind of, it's very traditional. You would make it on a map, you would trace it 3 times. You get dice to kind of set up the outlines of the continents and all that fun stuff. And I don't think I even started to digitalize it until we had a map making contest about 3 years ago, I think.
okay.
And that was my first ever time kind of going into the proper making something that could go on the tabletop simulator.
Now, when you say paper
So
maps, you would lay out a large sheet of paper and just draw them. Is what you're talking about.
yeah, that's
Okay.
basically it. So
And so talk about step one, going from being interested in and actually making paper maps to digitization. What was your first platform or software? How did you make that leap?
um, I'm trying to remember the software name. I'm sorry. It
Sure. No,
was
it's
it
fine.
was an Apple Store software thing.
Okay.
Actually, I can get my iPad right now and check. I still have it.
Yeah, but one of the bit more basic. Did you see? The reason I want to go down this road is that there are quite a few umpires who don't even attempt maps, and they use stock maps or standard topo maps. And I think it's interesting to trace your steps because it's a potential way that the breadcrumbs basically on how to make maps.
Uh, um, so I guess kind of what was my process then? What did I do to learn
Yeah, yeah.
more?
How did
That
you
kind
how
of
did
stuff.
you
Okay.
teach yourself basically to make them?
I think I made my very first digital map just kind of freehand.
Okay,
I had known about I know how to make contour maps already, and I was basically using all the skills I had learned in paper map making
right.
to attempt to make my first, I guess, digital map. And it was not the best. I'll say that.
Yeah,
And
you got to start somewhere though.
yeah, and after that, I started looking up kind of tutorials about kind of what free art software that I could use, methodology for map making, and there are 2 videos that were extremely useful to me. One was the Microsoft Paint tutorial released by Little Wars TV, I think
Yeah,
a couple
I've
of
seen
years
that
ago.
myself. That's a great
Yeah.
one. It really is.
I mean, that gave me the idea for all the elevation lines and that kind of stuff.
Right.
And another was Tunis's like ACW map where you kind of cut out a lot of his. It's basically how he textured maps in a way.
Right. Right.
So
James
that kind
also
of
has one on using GIMP to augment a map and using the clone tool for stuff like that.
oh yeah,
That Little Wars was amazing for the simple reason that it said you can use an completely off the shelf simple software and create a great result.
exactly.
And
So
what
Mike,
tools do you use now? Where did you land in terms of now that you're very experienced at it? Which software do you use?
I basically remained with Krita for since I really started.
Okay.
So Krita is a free. I think it's an open source art software.
Yep.
You look it up and you can pull it down. You're done.
Great. And it's layer based and all the rest, like the other ones, right?
It is one of the best things about it, and I wish I got paid for this, but I don't. One of the best things about it is it has a reference image feature where it pulls when you pull an image onto it, it basically converts it into I guess a floating reference image that is the same exact size as the original is. And so if you want to make
Hmm.
multiple tile maps, you can just pull in a reference image and actually just continue to trace off it and it will match up 1-to-1.
Really? So if you have a map, you pull in the image of the map into the software, and then you can trace on top of that, or is it actually manipulatable, the image?
Oh, what I mean is that you can extend off it, so you don't.
Ah,
So
ah,
you can kind
cool.
of like put it to the left side of your canvas. And for a lot of our software, the end of the canvas, they literally just start deleting stuff, so you can't
Right.
see it. And Krita is the only one where you've been able to do a tiling system
Oh, that's
like that
neat. I got it.
appropriately.
Yeah, and then which is perfect for maps, because if you find out that you need to extend out, 10 kilometers or whatever, you want to pop a tile on the end of it, and off you go.
Yeah, I don't have the technical knowledge to really describe it very well. Sorry about that.
That's fine. No, Photoshop can do a version of that, but Photoshop's paid. And I know that there are not a lot of people who use Photoshop, but I ended up there because I make up with money what I don't have in skills. Um,
I don't know. I mean, Photoshop takes a lot of skill to actually use. I still don't fully understand it.
Basically, I went to Photoshop because I snookered Damon into giving me all his settings. So
Oh,
for one time, Damon put his settings up. He in a weak moment, and I just rapidly screenshotted all of his settings and realized that if I just buy Photoshop and put all Damon's settings in, it'll you know leapfrog me ahead, and it actually did, because I learned a ton just from actually looking at his settings, which was an amazing tool, because it unlocked all of these softwares for me when I saw how Damon did it. I don't know, never know that I ever admitted that to Damon, but I know Damon. Let's just keep that between us. Anyway,
it's not like anyone will. It's not public or anything.
right. Yeah, it's just we're just having a quiet conversation. Don't tell
Exactly.
Damon.
Exactly.
That's what I always I always tease James on this, because I know he just sits down there. He's running so many games, he doesn't have time to listen to us blathering on about it. And so, what is your do you aspire to a style, or do you try to mimic the base map, and talk about kind of the aesthetic of the maps that you do?
Oof. I've always described my style to myself as being semi-cartoony.
Okay.
I try and get it to be realistic, but I think the nature of trying to have so many elements that are very visible to a player that are easily understandable, you have to kind of simplify it enough that the realism is sucked out of it a little bit.
Yeah.
So
So if you go back to the examples of the fantasy maps that we talked about earlier, they really aren't realistic, but they really do convey what they're trying to convey. The mountains in the
yeah,
old Tolkien maps, for example.
yeah, I have not. It's been a while actually since I've done one of those. So
Yeah. And so, what
sorry.
was the people started asking you to do maps for them? How did that all unfold?
Uh, it was a while ago. Jeez.
Yeah. Well, for a
I
while
think it's
you were the map guy, so people go ask,
yes,
have you do maps for
and then other people stole my. What? I'm kidding.
them.
I think it started out was when I realized that there was no real, I guess, map makers on the server, and so there would be the constant block to running a game was, well, I don't have a map for it, so I can't run it.
Right.
And so then I realized that it's kind of something that I could help out with on the server, and
Yep.
so I started my
Yep.
little map making business, for lack of a better word, and it just kind of went from there.
And so, how does that work in terms of if somebody wants you to make them a map? Do they give you a reference map from the period, or do they? What do you need from somebody to make a decent map for them?
Usually, I just need the general area and time period that they want. If they send me a reference image, it makes it 20 times better. But a
Sure.
lot of the times, I just do my own research because I find that a lot of there are a lot of census maps that can be well, it's the internet. It's Google, and Google does not like it when you're trying to find historical maps for some reason.
Yeah, they're trying
So
to route us all to their maps.
exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
So
And
It
is that an
depends
ongoing
basically.
concern? You helping people out in that way, or
Do you mean with finding maps or
yeah,
with?
helping people with maps? I mean, you had people give you a couple of bucks to help you out with a map. Is that still something that people come to you for?
Yep, I've got multiple active commissions at the moment, so it is
That's amazing.
still.
And so, how does that work in terms of what does a map roughly cost? We don't want to go down into too much detail or reveal the secrets of the business, but what is to get a decent, 30 by 30 kilometer map? What would that roughly cost for you to do that for someone?
There's a lot of factors that kind of go into it. I
Sure.
find that I usually spend around 10 to 20 hours working on a map,
Uh huh.
which is $100. So
Okay.
if I was to do an average cost, it would probably be around $100 or so.
Yeah. Fair enough. Okay. Well, if you're doing your masterpiece and you want that map sorted out to a high level of quality, it's worth the money. I spend that kind of money to make the paper or the maps printed out at the local print shop to do the live game. So it certainly is reasonable to do that, to think of it that way. Cool. All right, and then talk about your process of making the map. Which layer do you start with? I have to believe we all have a different approach to this. Those of us who make maps, like, how do you think about the layers in terms of organizing it in your head?
Sure. Um, there are two different approach methods that I use.
Uh huh.
If it's a completely fantasy map, I always start with the water first.
Okay.
If it's a real map where I'm actually tracing elevation lines, I'll start with the elevation first. Um, that's just kind of a personal thing for me where it's kind of usually it's kind of water that cuts out the terrain.
Mm-hmm.
And so if I'm on a historical map, I want to make sure that the water um, actually matches the the contours that I've laid out. And for if I'm making a fantasy map, then it's more I want the contours to match the water that I've laid out.
Right.
So
And do you put the water on top, or you do in terms of layers, or do you try to be pretty true with your tracing?
Uh, well, again, it depends.
Yeah,
I think that's going to be the answer to most of the questions.
sure, sure. Okay,
I usually will. I'll try to be pretty honest with the historical flow of a river or a stream,
right.
but sometimes it just doesn't match up at all. I kind of just I literally have to make up a line that
Right.
follows the actual contour and the flow of the land.
Particularly if you're trying to use a mixture of maps from different periods, and the water, of course, literally changes. So you got to figure out where it was in the historic period, even though that map may not have enough detail to help you finish the rest of it. If I've been caught up in that.
Exactly.
Yeah. And then
So
do you have a room at the Wolfton World Headquarters full of maps on the walls and things, or is this just a digital only thing now?
I have a leather folder, I think, that has all my old maps in
Really?
it that just are slowly dusting away.
That is
But
cool. All right. I had a
they're
friend
not very good.
whose wife found an antique map drawer, like the old ones that the surveyors had, and I always thought that would be cool to have. But apparently, those are pretty expensive. If you have a
Yeah.
wife looking for antiques out in the countryside, don't have her find a map drawer, because when I found out how much it was, I immediately changed my request to find one. But I
Jeez.
think that'd be kind of cool if you had an old surveyor's map drawer with your work in it.
Yeah,
That's
well,
great.
I have the mobile version.
Right,
So
right. Absolutely. How many maps do you think you've made roughly?
that is a very tough question because I've never actually kept track.
Yeah, yeah, in 11 years. 11 years of map making, drawn, digital, etc. So that's a lot of maps.
If I was forced to throw out a number that I knew would probably be a hyperbole, probably be around 100, maybe.
Okay, sure,
So
sure. That's cool. And your maps, just because I've seen them online, they're completely like none of the original map is visible. It's all your work that you've covered with layers and things, right?
yeah, it's at the very least I use. 2 different maps, but usually it will go up to something like 4. And what I try and do with my technique is I try and marry all the maps that I'm using together so they make one coherent image.
Super interesting. So you'll use 4 base maps to create a single map.
More or less.
Fascinating. And how do
Again,
you
it
how do you marry
depends.
them up over different periods and things like that? What are you just really good at sizing them, or?
Um, well, it's sometimes, and to be frank, you just kind of have to make a line up
Yeah, right,
at times.
right,
There will be roads that go nowhere. There will be villages that are not visible anywhere else. There will be places that are misspelled.
right,
You just kind of have to guess.
right, right. So you are in a way you're like doing translator's work. You're creating a new thing that takes all 4 of those and brings the best information forward that you can discern, right? So it's a thought process.
Exactly.
Yeah,
So I try and be um, I try and be accurate to kind of what might have been there at the time, but at the
right.
same time, I know that there are things that I miss. And there are things that I missed. There are things that the original map makers missed, and so you can never get 100% accurate map. You just try and get as close as you can.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And now, when you do your own games, so when you umpire, do you put a little extra zing into the map, or is the map then your energy goes in another direction in terms of pieces or research or things like that?
I have taken up the unfortunate habit of deciding that I have to do every single part of my maps when I'm running a game,
Yeah,
and that's not a good thing when you want to run strategic level games with tactical
just depends
battles.
on how much time you have.
Oh wait, they're having a battle. Because usually when it's having a battle, it's I gotta make sure I have all the pieces. In my case, it's no, they're having a battle. I have to make 4 tactical map sets, maps to
Oh
go.
my, oh my. I had a colleague in business one time. He was a technology lead. He used to say to my boss, who always had huge demands, "With enough time and energy, anything can be done." Oh, so talk about your umpiring and what games attract you. What are you working on? Talk us through a little bit of your portfolio.
Sure. I'm working on a game currently called The Ashes of Leipzig,
Oh
which I've
boy,
released a trailer for,
yeah.
um, which is not very good, but eh.
Hey,
It's more of a Napoleonic game, kind of set in the aftermath of Leipzig, but it's an alternate history scenario. Basically, all the games I run are some type of alternate history scenario. It's that way they're kind of unpredictable, and B, I don't have to do nearly as much historical research for them.
right.
So it's
So I
always
did see the
nice.
Ashes of Leipzig material. Talk about your inspiration for that. Kind of what did you pull together? Obviously Leipzig itself, but you had to bring it together some additional elements to make that work, right?
Yeah. For Ashes of Leipzig, it's ugh. See, this is why I need to make notes for your process because then you forget it.
Right. Well, it's the French on one side. I can guess that much.
Oh, okay, that's what you mean. Okay, you mean like the actual
Yeah, just the
structure of the
general. Like,
game.
okay, so in Leipzig in real life, how did you deviate from real life to make it work? To make it interesting and different.
Sure. When I was looking at the West Point Atlas for the battle,
Always a good source.
yep, I saw an army to the north of Leipzig called the Army of the Elbe. And I think historically most of it had made it to Leipzig, but then I was thinking, well, what happens if it didn't?
Right.
And so I just kind of went from there. So, okay, so what units, what nations would be in the area? Um, if the Army of the Elbe was still around, what would the Army of the Elbe have been commanded to do?
Right.
in the aftermath of Leipzig. And it was just kind of, I took that idea and I ran with it until I had a crazy scenario, which,
And so, what were you aiming to do with that crazy scenario? Is it imbalanced, or is it what was your kind of intent around creating something different?
sure. Sorry, my computer keeps trying to fall asleep on me.
Yeah.
It is a very imbalanced game where I have decided to be mean to one team in particular.
Yeah.
So I, I try and make most of my games unbalanced in one way, shape, or form.
Hmm.
Um, I don't know if I fully succeed in that usually, but I try.
Well, I
So
found if you're going to be mean to one side, it's always good to offer that role to Chief.
I'll keep
Right,
that in mind.
Chief, I got a role for you. Don't give him much information. He stumbles right in and he feels obligated. He can't leave. It's a good trick. I recommend it.
Exactly. I will keep that in mind.
So when it comes to high intensity combat, logistics, communication, planning, what do you emphasize in your scenarios for the players to go deep on?
I think for a lot of my games, it's been a leadership test.
Okay.
And so it's how do you operate in a leadership environment where the other team has, sorry, your own allies have slightly different goals than you do.
Okay.
So, and I feel like kind of Napoleonic, the coalition is a really good example of that,
Yeah. Yeah.
where they often have kind of slightly diverting goals, even in the peace conference.
Right.
So,
Right. It was in 1813 the Russians just kind of charted their own course, and everyone was like, "Hold on a second." The Russians said, "Off we go!" Right? That's great, and that always creates tension amongst the players on the same side, which I think is an often underexploited part of Kriegsspiel. It's terrific.
yeah.
And do you give
And
them different objectives, or how do you give the players slightly different perspectives?
it's sometimes I do give them slightly different objectives, which
Uh-huh.
can be contradictory to each other. Other times I try and relate some of the historical difficulties of an alliance into the I guess, strategic space.
Right.
So, for example, in an Erfurt game, the the Austrians and Prussian players had the same objective. It was basically defeat the French forces and take the city of Erfurt.
Uh huh.
However, they couldn't. The Austrian and Prussian forces at the time did not really fully trust each other,
Right.
and which I just kind of I put that in the briefing, and they really ran with it, and I was very glad for that. And at the same time, they couldn't really share battalion. You couldn't move a Austrian battalion into a Prussian brigade because it wouldn't fit, and they would just get mad at each other.
Right. They wouldn't mix. That's right. Yep. Hmm.
And that eventually escalated into a scenario where the Prussians took a headlong charge into some French veterans and took heavy losses. And then the Austrian and Prussian forces camped next to each other overnight, which resulted in a whole bunch of scuffles between the Austrian and Prussian forces and nearly started almost a revolt in a way. We even had a
Right.
small prison break. So, but
You know,
it's
you
kind of
mentioned strategic earlier. It sounds like if two forces are camping next to each other, is this an operational level game?
it was a combined operational and tactical level game.
And how do you do that? Do you do one play by post, one live? Do you do it all play by post, or what's your approach?
It's all play by post, and
Okay.
the map was luckily small enough that if say the regular operational turn would be around 4 hours, and a tactical turn would be about 15 minutes. And if I had a battle that was going on for a very long time, I would just slow down the operational game to
Hmm.
1 hour turns. So every
Right.
4 turns I had for a tactical game, I would do one turn, 1 hour of movement for the operational game. So while they weren't moving enough, a lot, that means that every player would get an update within about 2 weeks.
So you run you run them in parallel. So if I'm a player who's not involved in a tactical battle, I'm still experiencing movement, even though it's slowed. While the tactical players obviously are going full bore.
Yes.
Super interesting. I think that's a neat approach. Yeah. What works about that, or what doesn't work? What are watchouts for other umpires who would try that?
I think the biggest watch out is probably just burnout. It's
Yeah.
because your turn load is much higher than it would usually be, and so the
Right.
turn details kind of suffer a bit, or you miss small things. And it's even worse when you just completely forget what the original orders were when you're 3, I guess, operational turns in.
Yeah. Right.
So
How many players do you have in one of these games? Thinking about resolution load.
around 20 usually.
20. Okay.
So
How long will you take to do a resolution?
if I'm really on my game, oh, you mean okay?
Yeah, I
When I'm
mean, for
sitting
20
down
players,
actually
how long does that
doing
take
it,
you in real life to sit down and really give everyone a good report?
oh, really good report. Okay, that's different.
A
Usually I
mediocre
do
report then.
for a really good report, which the best one I ever did was like I think 13,000 words. It was insane. Don't do that.
Oh my, yeah, that's that for a
Um,
single report,
no, no,
13,000
no.
words.
For all the player reports put together.
Okay, good.
So I still don't
Well, that's
recommend doing that.
it's just under 1,000 per player. That's healthy. That's healthy.
It's a small essay for everyone.
Small essay. And where do you
That took
land
me
out in like in your normal course of play? How do you approach reports?
sure. I wrote something called the I can't remember what I called it. Okay, I wrote myself a little guide for kind of what Napoleonic armies could see at what distances and what they could hear.
Mm-hmm.
And then I just kind of I referenced the map that I made. I reference where the player positions are and what they're doing, and I reference the guide to. Sorry,
Mm-hmm.
got in my head myself. Um, when I'm writing a report, I basically inform the player what have they been doing and what they are
Okay.
doing.
Okay.
What do they see around them using that report, or I guess that distance guide.
Mm-hmm.
And then I try and indicate kind of the status of the people under their command. Are they tired? Are they grumbling? Are they hungry? So that way, I try and introduce both important uh, tactical and operational information, while at the
Yep.
same time trying to make the people under their command feel a little more alive, like they should care about them a bit more.
Right. So you lead with, here's what you tried to do, or here's what you did, here's where you are. Where's the screenshot playing that? Right at the very beginning or midway through?
Sure. The screenshot kind of just show. Oh, you mean when do I take the screenshot? I'm sorry.
No. If I'm looking at a report that you write, is the screenshot the first thing I see? Is it the middle or is it the end?
The screenshot is the first thing that you see.
First thing.
I
Okay.
use a. I take a bigger screenshot than most people, but I use a blur effect on the
You use
edges.
the blur effect.
Yeah.
Man, fancy. That's great. I know Damon's a big fan of the blur effect.
It is the best thing ever, and I will hear no other arguments.
I will brook no other. What? How do you create the blur effect?
Um, you can actually make it in Krita, where you take your screenshot and then you can create a blur mask,
Right.
and you basically cut out what you want the player to see with the blur mask clearly. I use an airbrush to do that, so that way it doesn't look kind of wonky. And after that, I just You
you
just take a picture of that screenshot. So you screenshot the screenshot, put it in their channel, and then you can take another screenshot on the on TTS, put that in Krita on another layer, and just move your blur mask up to it. And
got
that
it.
way you don't have to keep trying to reintroduce the blur mask. You just recut what you want the player to see. But you
So
don't have
you
to
have a
mess with the
large
settings.
map with a tighter blur mask, and you're moving that blur mask around. Am I getting that right?
Um, Not really. It's more on
Okay.
TTS. I take a screenshot and then I blur the screenshot.
You right, right. Okay.
Or
So
I might have
if
just misunderstood you. Sorry.
no, so we're all umpires here. So I'm thinking about the mechanics. So I keep um, a very specific order of documents so that so I know where to find things fast. So I have TTS as my first tab, or TTS is its own thing, but I alt tab over and I'm on a document where I'm cutting and pasting things in. I've got everything kind of laid out, and to actually cut screenshots into Krita would be a different path. So I'm just trying to literally envision your click stream of how you do that.
Sure. Um, I have not actually done it on a PC before, so that's going to be interesting for the first time that I actually try. But on a Mac, you can literally, when you take a screenshot of something, it goes to
Yeah.
the lower right hand side of the screen.
Yep.
Then you can literally just right click it and then go into Krita. Um, Sorry, no, that's not correct. That's a
Yeah, you do Command Shift 5 on the Mac, and that gives you the same area every single time, basically, right?
yeah.
Gotcha. Okay.
Um,
Okay.
but for moving it into Krita, you basically open Krita and then you can drag a screenshot into it.
Right.
And that way, well, the canvas sits around the screenshot, and then if you want to add more screenshots onto your canvas, that's when you look for the screenshot on the right hand side of the screen. You right click it, go into Krita, right click, and then you can just copy and
Right. So
then you
what
can just paste it
you're
there.
basically creating one image file for that game, and you're copying layers on top of layers, but your mask remains the same.
Exactly.
Okay. For those who don't play with these softwares, this is all going to be Greek, but ancient Greek. But for those of us who play with layers and how to umpire quickly using tools, this is fascinating technical detail. Because you basically, through repetition, these click streams get very fast, and it's almost like driving a car. You don't think about hitting the brake or the gas, but you just like Krita's open, and that's why you have to take a minute to think about it, because you just naturally now you just do it, right?
Yeah.
Cool. Okay.
So here's
Yeah, I have
about
my own click stream. I'm always. I think it would be interesting to somehow capture in video how each of us do our click stream, because I think we'd all be fascinated how different it would be.
oh,
You talked about the right hand side and the right click. I use the alt tab structure. Then I'm sure James uses a different one. Everybody uses a very different approach to essentially creating what we're all aiming for is faster output. So when we're doing 20 players, we can get through it in a reasonable amount of time.
yeah.
Cool. And in terms of so you do broader screenshots. So what is in a screenshot in your philosophical approach? It's more than just what you see, obviously.
Well, actually, with the blur, you can get everything what the player would see. So
Okay.
that's why the blur is the best.
And what does the blur represent to the player in your approach?
Oh, did I just turn off my? Can you still hear me?
I can hear you just fine. You're
Okay,
good.
I yanked the power button on something.
Yeah. So the blur represents that which is too far to really discern. I see movement, but I don't know whether it's horses or men, or what does that represent?
Exactly.
Right.
So let's say it's a brigade coming up at you. You can't really count the individual battalions in that brigade, but you know that the brigade is there. And that has always been a point of frustration for me when I've had something like a division sized element that was just on the outside of my screenshot, and I would receive no word on it until the
Right.
entire brigade was deployed to my front. And so that's why I kind of came up with the blur effect. It's just kind of just to try and counter that slight issue.
Yeah, right, right. Because if you see units at a kilometer, a couple kilometers out, you'll just see kind of a massive movement. You won't see like the front rank and nothing behind it, right?
Yeah,
You will
yeah,
get a sense for the size behind it based on the small crawly movement behind it, whether it's a large unit or a small unit. And I think in our screenshots where the umpire just taps the very front, we understand the intent of not showing off too much of what's there, but it actually doesn't represent the way you'd have a sense for what's out there in real
yeah.
life, right?
It kind of people have talked about the blindfold effect a bit.
Uh huh.
I don't, and I feel like that the having the hard line that's only a kilometer out kind of really emphasizes the blindfold at times.
Explain the blindfold effect for those of us who hadn't been on those strings.
Sure. The blindfold effect is basically when you do a turn, you cannot see anything for 15 minutes. So you are figuratively putting on a blindfold
Right.
until the next turn, where you take off the blindfold and you can finally see the field for a short moment in time. So it's really hard to get an idea kind of for the flow of people moving on the field, which
Right.
can make it very difficult to kind of track ebb and flow in a way.
And players will naturally tend to over index on the snapshot
Yeah.
because
And,
that's what they
and
see versus the flow that happen on either side of it.
yeah,
So as an umpire, you're choosing, is it the moment of first contact? Is it the resulting retreat? How do you represent it? I don't think we I don't think we've cracked that yet. I think that's a good for some young umpire who's up and coming, crack the ebb and flow problem, and we will give you great. James will take you out on his yacht.
James will take you out on your yacht. You'll never be seen again, but James will
You'll
suddenly
never
have
be
a new
seen again,
technique.
and suddenly James will have solved the ebb and flow problem. That's the strange thing about him.
Exactly.
Be careful about going on James's yacht. That's the lesson, Wolfton.
That's
That's
the.
the lesson.
It's actually why I'm
Good.
here. This is a warning.
To give the warning, don't go on the yacht. Oh,
Speaking of which, I got this great new invitation about a yacht. That's
yeah, right, right here. Make a couple maps, come on the yacht, and show them off. What?
exactly.
So so Ashes of Leipzig. You're sticking in the Napoleonic frame, or do you have an ancient battle coming up?
Um, I actually have a World War One
You do.
off-brand Colorado World War One uh, game that I have in the planning in the works. I was going to run it for the Open Saturday yesterday, but I just was busy, unfortunately, and couldn't do it.
What is an off-brand Colorado World War One? What does that mean?
Um, it's a very arcade system about a potential World War One tech level engagement in the Midwest.
Yeah, look at that.
So I just
And does
like the
it happen in
Midwest.
Colorado?
The first battle did, or sorry, the first campaign did. This next campaign will be more Oklahoma based.
There you go. Just like the Russian steppes, our very own Russian steppes in Oklahoma. There you go.
Exactly. Exactly.
Cool.
So
Talk
that
about
is
your
why.
combat systems in terms of, you just mentioned system there, an arcade system. What are your inspirations and kind of what do you tend toward when you're creating your own combat systems?
When I'm making a combat system, I want to have it be simplistic enough where I can very easily understand it and explain it to other umpires, and
Mm-hmm.
one that doesn't take too long, even on the play by post resolution. At the same time, I want to do everything. I'm going to call it on the board or on
Yep.
TTS. I don't want to be going to Excel or to Google Sheets or whatever to be plugging in a formula for an engagement, because I find that I get burned out very, very quickly when I do that.
Yeah. Yeah. That's just extra clicks in the click stream, right? Going over
Yeah. Not only
tools.
that, it's when you miss something and you got to go back and forth 10 times. Just no. Just no.
Yeah. Okay. So simple
Um,
system. Which did you derive anything from other IKS systems, or did you pull from a board game, or did you make it yourself? How did you approach creating it?
I'm sure it's well, actually, it's mainly based on the Umpire Digest that I've been writing. They kind of encapsulate an informal system, and the Umpire Digests are just short, I guess, Napoleonic tactical guides to stuff like urban combat or cavalry combat.
What are these things? I haven't seen them. The Umpire Digest. What are they?
It's basically a short essay that I write every once in a while based on a book written by Robert Moore. I can't pronounce his name properly.
Okay.
And it's basically my notes from that book put into an essay form and then kind of
Where
applied to
can an
Kriegsspiel.
aspiring umpire find these essays? If I'm now, I've got to go check these out myself. I
Uh,
think I have seen a couple of them, but where can we find them?
I think that some have been posted onto the actual IKS website,
Okay.
but I usually post them in the other resource links on the main server.
There is one on the ICAST website. That's right. I've read that one. It's on. That's right.
I think it's the cavalry one. It has like a
It is.
typo in the middle of it that kills me every time I see it.
Well, we all didn't want to say anything. I'm glad you brought it up
Okay, okay.
because
It's a good thing this
how
is not
picky
public.
how picky the IKS people can be.
Yeah.
That typo gets us every time.
Yeah.
All right, cool. Well, where's the full body of these essays? Where do they live?
Uh, Scattered about on in other resource links. So you have to go on a scavenging hunt to
Well,
get them.
pull them together and let's get them. Let's get them up. I'm actually writing I'm rewriting the Moltke problems. We can get your essays together. We'll create a little compendium of stuff that people can access.
Yeah. I will
We can,
try
and
and.
then someday we can say in fine booksellers near you, right?
Oh no, that's never happened.
Wolfton, where can you find your essays? In fine booksellers near you. Remember when people used to say that? Those were good days.
Pretty sure that there would be a lot of copyright infringement.
That was back when the International Kriegsspiel Society was just the Southern California Kriegsspiel Society, where everything was analog and you had to get together and arm wrestle for victory. It was crazy.
See, back
At
in
least
the
that's
olden days, you had to walk to the
right.
battlefield.
Boy, those were good
Unbelievable.
days. Back when blocks were blocks. Anyway, cool. Okay, well, I'd love to. Yeah, it'd be great to share some of these essays. I think what is and I'm just going to go on the name more. What is his book about?
It is basically a comprehensive guide to Napoleonic warfare. So
That's terrific.
let me. I wonder if I can
And is
find
it
a.
more? Is it told in terms of anecdotes, or is it more a kind of discursive about what was happening?
It's a mix. It's a mix of what was happening, kind of anecdotes about Napoleonic warfare, as well as first-person accounts about whatever he's writing about.
Oh, great. Okay, cool.
Sorry, I think he might be Rory Moore instead, not Robert.
That's all right. Roy Moore. Okay, great. And so you read a bit and you write an essay based on what you've read. And I have now that we talk, I have seen specifically the one you have on the website, and I've seen some other stuff as well that you've done. That's great. Which just makes you a better umpire because you then internalizing all of those lessons really, because it's not really about the essay as much as now you know it in your
Yeah.
bones.
So
What would you tell an aspiring new umpire who hasn't taken all the steps that you've taken, short of draw paper maps and learn from there? But what would you what advice would you give to a new umpire?
sure. I think the most important thing for a new umpire is finding a time period that you actually really enjoy
Mm-hmm.
and something that you know a bit about when you start out. So, especially in the tactical and operational sphere, if you want to run a war game about it.
Right.
Um, so that way, when you start, you don't get burned out by doing something that you just don't enjoy. and especially you want to start small as well, probably with about 4 players. You can even do a 1v1 if you want to, with you as the
Right.
umpire. But I think the biggest threat to an umpire starting out is just getting frustrated and burned out. Because if you have a really bad experience the first time, it's going to be hard starting out again the second time.
Good
So,
advice. Good advice. I think whether it's period or producing the elements for a game. So if you, as you love maps, creating the maps gives you fuel. It doesn't detract from your energy, but maybe there's some other part that might not be as much fun. People
naming
who
the
hate
pieces.
making maps, should actually just pull down stock maps, right? So keep the flame of enjoyment going, and then everything else will follow. I think that's great advice. I myself have run afoul of that a couple of times, but I've steered myself back to what I really enjoy. And is there anything else that we haven't covered today?
Not that I can think of at the top of my head.
Great.
I hope I was able
Umpire
to be.
Wolfton, you are a terrific contributor to the community. You put an amazing amount of stuff into the IKS site. Obviously, you umpire actively with interesting, different types of games. Your essays, your maps that you produce for others. All this is just really appreciated, and I know you're an iconic member of the community. We didn't even talk about the fact you're a master umpire. You've done that. You've done that whole thing. So. Um, a real solid member of the community. We really appreciate it. It's been great having you on the show today.
Well, thank you very much. It's kind of weird. I never thought of myself as an iconic guy on the server. I just kind of think of myself as a random person that's here.
Everybody knows Wolfton. I can guarantee you that.
For better or for worse?
For better or for worse.
That's the real
All right,
question.
brother. Have a great day.
You too.